and monocot versus dicot. So what we're asking you to do is to write a fact or draw something that's factual as you watch the video that might bring this to mind, showing you something that's the difference between a vascular plant and a non-vascular plant, a seed-producing plant as opposed to a spore-producing plant, a monocot plant as opposed to a dicot plant. All right. We're going to go ahead and begin. What's the difference between vascular plants? Well, number one, vascular plants are the largest group. And even though you don't know it, you've actually studied this group a little bit last week. Vascular plants have a well-developed system for transporting water and food. They have true roots, true stems, and true leaves. That means it looks like a regular plant, the kind that you would, flowers that you'd pick out of the garden, something that would grow tomatoes, tomato plants, trees, shrubs, bushes, because they all have something, vascular tissue, that helps circulate water and food throughout the plant. You learned what that vascular tissue was that last week. Xylem, that transports water and minerals up from the roots to the rest of the plant, and phloem. Phloem starts with the pH. Photosynthesis had to have occurred before phloem could transport food from the leaves down to the rest of the plant. So xylem up and phloem down, xylem up and phloem down, xylem up and phloem down, help that plant stay healthy in the ground. Yeah. We remember that. So in order to have a vascular plant, you have to have xylem and phloem going through the plant. And that means the plant has to be tall enough for xylem and phloem to be there in existence. It has to have true roots, true stems, and true leaves. Examples of vascular plants: woody stems, trees and bushes, and herbaceous stems and grasses. What kind of herbs do you know about? Cilantro, parsley, oregano. This is a vascular plant, a redwood tree. If you were to take this tree and cut what they call a cross section, which is what they show right here, you could see that this tree has old xylem that helps to support the tree in what they call the heartwood, and then newer xylem on the outside. And if you look way out here, right past the bark, you see the inner bark or the phloem. So that's what it looks like in a tree. Non-vascular plants are just pretty much the opposite. They don't have xylem or phloem. Oh my word, no xylem or phloem? How does anything get up and down then? Well, it's because it doesn't really do that. Plants that are non-vascular do not have a well-developed system for transporting water and food. They do not have true roots. They do not have true stems. They do not have true leaves. They have to obtain nutrients directly from the environment and distribute it from cell to cell. That sounds kind of confusing, but I've always told my students that imagine you'd have a little bucket of water over here, and there's all these little plant cells, and this cell way over here is thirsty. Well, he has to yell to the guy over here and say, "Hey, I'm thirsty. Send over that bucket of water." And so the bucket starts to come and move and move and move and move and move and move. And finally, the cell over here that needed the water gets it. That's how they have to send all the water and all the nutrients from one cell to the next cell, 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 to the end. So that's how it is with a non-vascular plant. They usually result in these plants being very, very small because they can't have very tall plants because they have no true roots, stems, or leaves, so they don't have xylem or phloem. The only three examples that you have to memorize for non-vascular plants are these three. So this would be very important for you to write down. Mosses, liverworts, how weird. Liverworts is a weird name, and hornworts is another weird name. Those should be easy for you to remember because they're so strange. Hornworts, liverworts, and mosses, and they're very, very small. So you need to make sure that you write very small. Mosses look like this. Mosses, M-O-S-S-E-S. They're all over the floor of the forest. See how small they are? The trees are tall, but moss is small. The trees are tall, but moss is small. And liverworts looks like this. Liverworts is L-I-V-E-R-W-O-R-T-S, just like you would think of liver and warts, but it's spelled a little different. So liverworts, see how teeny they are? I bet you've seen these on the floor whenever you were walking through the forest, and you didn't even know that it was called liverworts, and it's a non-vascular plant. It doesn't have xylem or phloem. Mosses are non-vascular plants. They do not have xylem or phloem. And then there's the hornwort. You've probably seen hornwort and thought it was grass. A lot of people think that it's grass, but hornwort usually doesn't grow by the grass. That's how you can identify it. It's usually growing amongst mosses and liverwort. So wherever you see mosses and liverworts, you'll probably see hornworts not very far away. Seed-producing plants. We have studied the seed a little bit. We know that it has an embryo. It contains a plant embryo, which is the beginnings of the roots, stems, and leaves, and it has stored food inside. That stored food is called a cotyledon. Cotyledon. And it's surrounded by a seed coat. Here's the seed coat on the outside. We've been studying this and we've been memorizing the parts of a seed, so that should look very, very familiar to you. There are two major groups of seed-producing plants, cone-bearing and flowering. And we're going to watch a video tomorrow, Wednesday, and Thursday that reminds us about the cone-bearing plant, which is called a gymnosperm, and a flowering plant, which is called an angiosperm. And we'll give you hints and tricks for how you can remember those. Now, the one thing that you're going to learn this week that's new about the seed is that the food inside this seed either comes in one lunch bag or two lunch bags. If it comes in one lunch bag, it's called monocot. Mono means one. If it comes in two lunch bags, it's called dicot. Di means two. So some seeds come with two lunch sacks of food, and other seeds come with one lunch sack of food. This is corn, a bean, and a pine seed. It looks like a little helicopter when it flies in the air. Pine trees have seeds that are called naked seeds. They're stuck inside a cone, but once they bust out, they're a naked seed. Spore-producing plants. Spore-producing plants are different than seed-producing plants. Spores are much smaller than seeds. So an important fact to write about spore-producing plants is that they're so much smaller than seeds. They're little. Almost all flowerless plants produce spores. Wow! I didn't know that. If it's not a flower, it's producing spores. Examples of it are mosses and ferns. Now we saw mosses a couple moments ago, and I know that you've probably seen a fern before. Your mom might have one growing in a bucket on her porch, or maybe you've been in the forest and saw a big fern. Flowering plants. Flowering plants differ from conifers. If it says conifer, if you look at the first part of the word of conifer, C-O-N-E, cone, C-O-N-E. There's a cone in conifer. There's a cone in conifer. You mean conifers or cones? That's exactly what I mean. The fancy word for cone-bearing plant, there's two fancy words for cone-bearing plants, conifer or gymnosperm. And that sounds confusing, but like I said, in the next couple days, you'll see some videos and it will help you to understand it more. So C-O-N-E, underline those letters, write the word conifer, and underline C-O-N-E, cone. Conifers, because they grow their seeds inside an ovary, which is embedded in a flower. So flowering plants differ from cone-bearing plants because they grow their seeds in an ovary, which is embedded in a flower. We know that flowers have ovaries. We've memorized that. We know all the parts of a flower. Then the flower becomes a fruit containing seeds. We know that because we wrote all of our SpongeBob essays just about that. Examples include trees, shrubs, vines, flowers, fruits, vegetables, and legumes. Legume, beans, items that are like beans. All of the plants that are like beans, that have beans in them. Spore-producing plants like mosses and ferns. I know you've seen a fern before. Look at this. This is a fern, and we already know what mosses look like, but you didn't know that they reproduce by spores. So they don't reproduce by seeds, they reproduce by spores. And spores are itsy bitsy. And on a fern, they're up underneath the leaves of a fern. And in mosses, they're very small and they come out. What's the difference between a seed and a spore? Seeds have multicellular embryo inside them. That means more than one cell. They have multicellular embryo inside. Just like our flower plants or our apple seeds, any type of plant that is going to grow taller than something very short. And they contain a supply of nutrients, and we call that monocot or dicot. One food sac is monocot, 2 food sacs is dicot. And then there's spores. Spores, on the other hand, they only have one cell. Seeds have many cells. Multicellular means many cells. Spores only have one little cell, all by itself, and they do not contain any food inside them. No sacks of lunch? Are you kidding me? I wouldn't want to be a spore. I want a sack of lunch with me. If I've got a breakout, I want to have some food. So spores are so sad. Think of spores. Just think of poor Spore. Poor Spore. He's so sad because he doesn't have any lunch sack. And what do they have in common? They both have a coating to protect them. They both can survive harsh conditions. They both contain parent plant's genetic material. So they're just like their moms and dads. If they have a parent plant, they're just like them. But look at the size difference. Seeds are bigger and spores are smaller. Seeds are bigger and spores are very small. So one major thing that you need to know about seeds that is different from spores is that seeds contain food. They are monocot or dicot. But spores, poor spores, they're sad because they do not have a supply of nutrients. What's the difference between cone-bearing plants? Most cone-bearing plants are evergreen with needle-like leaves. What does it mean to be evergreen? It means it doesn't matter if it's summer, winter, spring, or fall. They can be green all year long, just like these spruce trees. Some children call these Christmas trees. It's because sometimes that's what people use them for, but it is a spruce tree just the same. And then there's pine trees, and different trees are used for holidays. Most cone-bearing plants are evergreen with needle-like leaves. These are needle-like leaves. Isn't that funny? They're called leaves. Conifers never have flowers, but they produce their seeds in cones, like this. Examples of those conifers are pine cones, spruce, so pine trees, spruce trees, juniper trees, redwood trees, and cedar trees. You need to list a couple of these because they'll come up later. So you need to know cone-bearing plants are evergreen with needle-like leaves. They never have flowers, but they make their seeds in cones. Examples that you could put down are pine, spruce, juniper, redwood, and cedar. So why don't you just at least write 2 or 3 of those? Redwood looks like this. Juniper looks like this. Spruce. This is the difference between male and female cones. The male cone usually looks more elongated and thin, and the female cone looks like this before she's ready to open up, and when she opens up, these break off and they fly in the wind, and that's what some of the kids call helicopters. Monocots. Let's look and see if we could tell. A monocot is a seed with one food storage area called monocotyledon or monocot. It's cotyledon or monocotyledon or monocotyledon. It just depends on how you pronounce it. If you just remember mono means one and cotyledon is food sac, so one food sac. Mono means one, and cotyledon is a food sac, or food for the seed to break out in germination. So monocot means it's just a short way of saying monocotyledon. Flowers of monocots have either 3 petals or multiples of 3. So any flower you see that has 3 petals would be a monocot flower. The leaves of monocots are long and slender with veins that are parallel to each other. So they're long and slender leaves, and the veins are real close to each other. The vascular tube structures are usually scattered randomly throughout the stem. We're going to show you pictures of this in just a moment. And examples include grass, corn, rice, lily, and tulips. So examples of monocots are grass, corn, rice, lilies, and tulips. And if you just pause, I have a chart with this in just a moment. Dicots. Dicot, remember di meant 2. So a seed with 2 food storage areas is called a dicotyledon or dicotyledon or dicot. That's the shortened word that we all use. Do you notice how there's 2 leaves here? So 2 food storage areas and then 2 new leaves popped up. If you look back at the monocot, there's only 1. Dicot has 2. So flowers of dicots have either 4 or 5 petals on their flowers or multiples of 4s and 5s. So real complicated flowers like roses that have so many petals, that would be a dicot. The leaves are usually wide with branching veins, kind of like if you think about a maple leaf, they're very wide and they have branching veins. You could see the veins all through a maple leaf. So maple trees are dicots. The vascular tube structures are arranged in circular bundles. If you noticed with monocot, it wasn't circular, they were random. They really didn't have enough. I always tell kids they didn't have enough food to be smart enough to not be random. So the vascular tube structures are arranged in circles. So this group has so much more food that it could be a little bit more sophisticated. Examples are roses, dandelions, maple trees, oak trees, and those are dicots. Here's the chart I was telling you about. Monocots versus dicots, but in pictures. I love pictures. It helps me understand things better. So now, if you look at this seed, this is a monocot seed. It only had one sack of lunch, one food storage sack. And if you look right below it, a dicot had two food storage sacks in this seed. This is the seed broken open. So you could see that there's one food sack over here, and there's the embryo, baby junior, and there's a whole other food storage sack. So monocot, mono meant one, cot meant food storage, so one food storage sack, and dicot has two food storage sacks. Look at the difference whenever you think of monocot, think of a corn seed. Because doesn't this look like the husk when you have to shuck the corn? I don't know if you've ever shucked corn before, but you have to clean all those husks off the corn. You know how long and slender they are and how you could see the veins through each of the leaves? That's what a monocot seed gets, leaves just like that with what they call parallel veins. Now a dicot, they have big, fat, branching leaves like this maple leaf right here. And do you see all the veins that go through it? That's called branching veins. So parallel veins, monocot. Branching veins, dicot. And then the stems, a stem, if you took a cross section of the stem, just cut a piece of the stem off, all of those little vascular tissue would just be bounced all over the place. Kind of just no rhyme or reason. It's just like an old pin cushion that's been overused. And this down here is a dicot stem. See how it looks like a honeycomb? Nice and neat. This guy doesn't know what he's doing, but this guy's nice and neat. And then the flowers. 3 petals or multiples of 3, which means 3 would come on the flower and then maybe 3 more would grow on top of it and 3 more on top of it. That is called a monocot flower. Flower parts in 3s. And then dicot flowers are in 4s or 5s. So if it has 4 or 5 petals, then it's a dicot, because it had more food to make more things. More food for more veins, more food for a bigger leaf, more food for more intelligent vascular tissue, and more food for more petals. Examples of a monocot would be grass, corn, lily,